Welcome back to Powered by Play. I'm Drew, and I'm a professor of theater at Chapman University in Southern California.
I'm Avery, and I'm a theatrical scenic designer. Every month on this podcast, we explore what we play, how we play, and why we play.
We believe play powers us, and that's what makes it powerful.
All right, Drew.
All right, Avery.
Press play. Today, we are talking about aggression and destruction. We can't really keep playing with our Legos unless we take apart all the pieces we've already used. And who doesn't like smashing their completed creation all onto the floor all at once? And maybe it's not even done yet, but you're frustrated and you're ready for a new start. Meanwhile, what is so fun about collecting Nerf guns and having Nerf battles with your friends all day? How is fighting, professional or not, a ritual that's full of play or aggression or both? What are the ways that we play around with causing chaos or exchanging pain, and why do we involve ourselves in activities that hurt so good? We're here to investigate the cycle of creation and destruction and how we let out our aggression in the best or the worst ways.
Well, maybe it's time to go back to childhood and examine where this compulsion to fight or to smash began. So I remember when I was a kid, there was some roughhousing and fighting with my sibling, whether it was kind of like on the couch or in the pool or whatever. Now, we also knew how to be careful when roughhousing in the pool. I do want to say that. But there was definitely kind of like, I don't know, sibling based sort of like pushing each other around and that kind of thing. Also, some rough playground play when I was a kid. And so running around playing tag or other things where you maybe tossed a ball up and somebody caught it and then you tackled that person, that kind of thing. This may have been gendered. It's been a while since I was on the playground, but I do kind of remember girls and boys, because that's what we were divided into back then, sort of playing in different ways and in gender-specific groups. And also plastic swords and lightsabers. This was the time of the original Star Wars trilogy, and so lightsabers were very big, and if we had lightsabers, we would clash them and, of course, make the noises, because that was always great. When I was a kid, I had some really interesting cognitive dissonance because my sister and I were not allowed toy guns. My mom didn't want us to have toy guns. And however, my father was a hunter. And so my father would take me and sometimes my sister, but primarily me, on hunting trips. And there I learned about rifles, I learned about firearms a little bit. I learned about cleaning them and loading them and how they were different and which animals would be shot with different guns and things like that. I never got to the stage of shooting them myself. I think I got sort of to that stage and then my dad realized, oh, I don't know that this is really kind of step that my son wants to take. So some really interesting cognitive dissonance with guns and firearms when I was a kid. A lot of stories that I read, whether they were choose your own adventures or whether they were Dungeons and Dragons adventures that I was either reading or someone was leading for me, required us to attack. And in a choose your own adventure, usually you're not making that choice. You make a different choice, like, do you stay and try to battle it out? And then, or do you flee? And if you stay and choose to battle it out, then the author of the book is pretty much going to tell you, you draw your gun and point it at your target. And pulling the trigger, you watch your target fall, or things like that. And I also remember video games when I was a kid and the adrenaline that was associated with that, the aggression. even something as simple as like Galaga or something like that, where you're firing from a spaceship and things are coming at you and they're coming at you really quickly, that created a lot of adrenaline. There was one game, Avery, called Castle Wolfenstein. And the first version of this was in the 80s. And you were going through a castle and you were either hiding or you were shooting Nazi soldiers, and you were trying to get to the battle plans, the Nazi battle plans. And so this was very stressful because you never knew whether someone was going to come around the corner. And somebody had recorded all kinds of German phrases that the soldiers would shout at you, like Schweinhund,
Oh
and
my
that
gosh.
I know, and stuff like that. And so you would have these characters like yelling at you from around the corner, and then they were going to come and get you. Now, the next iteration of Wolfenstein was Wolfenstein 3D. That was in the 90s. And in the 90s, that was one of the first, if not the first person shooter games. And you were again moving through the castle, but instead of a top down view, it was a first person view where you were literally watching the castle sort of unfold in front of you and people approach you. And in that one, the storyline expanded to you were actually in the last part of this game. You were looking for Hitler, who had somehow gotten himself mechanical exoskeleton and was running around the castle in this very mecha type thing, and you were supposed to take him down. And so it was when I was a kid, it was always satisfying to either watch characters taking down Nazi soldiers or play games in which you did so, because they were absolutely 100% the bad guys. And violence against them was justified, was necessary, and was rewarded. So those are some things that I remember about being a kid. What about you?
Yeah, you mentioned playing on the playgrounds, and that instantly brought back memories of me playing dodgeball when I was in elementary school. There on our playground, there was, like, just a large circle on it, and that was usually reserved for dodgeball during recess or lunch, and I prided myself upon so I was always the shortest in the class, if not the second shortest, and I
Yeah,
prided
that's right.
yeah, I prided myself on, like, trying to be better than my shortness, so I enjoyed proving myself at dodgeball and also, like, running really fast. That was also another one of my things at the time. And to this day, I still have some scars on my elbow from some really interesting dodgeball moves that I did. And some of the brightest days of my recess childhood was when I would successfully hit the largest kid tallest kid or whatever, like a big guy. Like I would successfully throw this ball at a big guy, and I would just glisten with pride because look at me, this little old kid hitting this kid who's like several grades older than me and who has seniority or just like they're just a rank above me in some way, and I was able to usurp them, and I felt good about those, and I feel good about having my scars because maybe it shows that I was really serious about it, and I would do anything to dodge or whatever, and because I was small, so I was also good at dodging, and it would be awesome when my little old 3rd grade crush would throw the ball at me, but I would dodge it. And so, wow, he gave me some attention and I proved myself to also survive, the move. Wow, that's so cool, 3rd grade me. And I also grew up in Girl Scouts, Venture Scouts, and we would often go camping, and there were some campsites where they would have archery ranges or gun ranges. So that was the first time when I was maybe 17. That was the first time that I shot guns. And I specifically remember like the kickback on that. It was very um holding a thing that is a tool and it's smaller than you, but the way that it releases little tiny cannonball of destruction, and then the physics of it, of how much it moves your own body back, and then the sound of it, like having to wear hearing protection, and just learning to be safe with it, but also trying to aim with it too. It was a very interesting experience, and I don't think I've shot other guns since, but I guess like now I have that little memory and that little skill set tucked away back in my head. Another thing that my siblings and I did often was we did kung fu lessons growing up. We went to majority Vietnamese places, and as a kid it was just a great way to stay active and connect with other Vietnamese peers and families. And our teacher, our shifu, had a very clear direction of making sure that we understood that martial arts is about discipline and respecting others, and also learning from a few different martial arts styles at once too, like was a way to grow my interest in the practice too. And we also had performative aspects, like we would perform at some Thet festivals and other events in the community. And yeah, it was just like a really great learning experience because we would have to practice these forms, which is just kind of like it's like a dance routine, but a martial arts routine. And one of the ones that I did was the drunken form, which is it's kind of what it sounds like. You are pretending to be drunk, kind of, or at least your movements are not as rooted in the ground and solid, where but your movements are more swaying and fluid and loose, and you look like you're about to lose balance, but you don't, but you're still powerful looking while you fight. And that was a fun thing to do.
That's really
Another
interesting. So you were doing
Yeah.
the drunken form as a kid, as a young person?
Yes, I was. I think I was probably like 10 or 11.
That is wild. And without any kind of knowledge of what it actually feels like to be drunk, and
Yeah.
probably not a lot of firsthand knowledge of how people look when they are drunk,
No, I
the
fortunately did not.
teachers are telling you, "Okay, now do this, make your body do that." That's fascinating. Wow.
Yeah, because it was more about the physicality of it. It was more of like rehearsing the off kilter, the balance, the oh you stand on one leg here and then your hand is even so like with other forms like in tiger you might have like a claw or you might be doing like fists for a different form, but for the drunken form like your hand is like holding a invisible cup. And that's kind of it's kind of characteristic of that physicality, the danceness of it. Another fun thing that we had to figure out was how to yell during punches, and there were so many memories of just our whole class just giving really weak yells, and then our teacher lecturing us on, y'all gotta do better. Like you gotta let everything out. It's gotta be a lot. You're right now. You're at a 2. You need to be at like a 20. And my brother still practices martial arts. He mentioned a little bit about some of the different kinds that he practices, like wushu, which is Chinese. It's more modernized and flashy. You kind of focus on the weapon sounds and how you look first and foremost. So they're very like showy. He also does va bin din, which is Vietnamese style, or one of the many Vietnamese styles. It's more practically oriented with hand forms, and you also practice weapons like broadsword, straight sword, staff. And he's also doing a guan dao, which is like a pole, but it's got like a really big sword on the end. He told me to look it up, and then I did, and it was pretty cool. And he also does Tai Chi, where you move energy around in your body. You're focusing, between your hands and then directing your energy to different places. So it's all about breathing and balance. And oh, overall, my siblings and I, we would like fight each other a lot growing up. Verbally, physically, just have some altercations over. Oh my God, you're on my side of the room. You'll push here, a little light punch there, and definitely our martial arts experience contributed a little bit to that, of at least like knowing how to throw a few punches or kicks and stuff. So Naturally, my parents and our teacher would always emphasize, like, you gotta use martial arts to defend yourself and defend your loved ones and to grow stronger, not to harm others intentionally. So our fights were not as bad as they could have been. We were just little naughty little kids sometimes, and we'd often tattle on each other, and even sometimes we'd tattle when our sibling did not hit us because there's a running joke in my family where my sister would just do a mundane thing, like, not even, like, barely aggressive. I would just yell, like, "Mom, Sarah hit me," or, "Mom, my sister, my brother are bullying me," and, it would just it was funny now it's funny now, but, oh my gosh, we were so angry when we would do that because the consequences were high, the stakes were high because the rules and guidelines around fighting each other were, relatively strict in a good way, so, kind of learning how to navigate those, fields of disagreements and conflicts growing up was interesting. And then
Yeah.
last of all, my parents would sometimes even blame our aggression on, like, video games and media because, like, my dad would call some stuff that we watched, like, Harry Potter or Teen Titans or even Tom and Jerry, like, he would watch over our shoulders for a little bit, and he'd be like, "Oh my god, that's so violent." And as kids, like, we didn't think much about it because it's just funny, like, Tom and Jerry chasing each other around, like, you hit them with a flat iron, and then they turn into the shape of a flat iron, and then they just kind of ripple back into shape, and then they just go on with continuing the chase, or they lose or win, and I that is technically like, Tom and Jerry is full of comedic violence, and I I think there are lines between maliciously enjoying the violence, and wishing harm upon the characters and using media as a way to continue to wish harm upon others around you. Um, but in my scenario, at least, it was just a very, "Oh, look at these characters being really mean to each other," and kind of reveling in that because I didn't want to really do that in real life, but watching it play out on the TV between a cat and a mouse, and they're just motivated by cheese and milk and, like, affection from the human. Yeah, it was just another example of how children's media can show aggression and violence in a lot of different ways.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the running themes of today is going to be the line between violence that is more playful and less painful and violence that crosses the line.
For
So,
sure.
yeah, and we'll examine that on a couple of different ways. Let's talk about targeting because the first thing you have to do if you're going to attack something or destroy something is focus in on it and actually hit it. And it has to be targeted. We have to learn to land a blow or hit the bullseye. And so as kids and as adults, we engage in things like you described, like archery, shooting ranges, and now there are a lot of axe throwing parlors being built. And so we can throw axes, we can throw darts, anything, or all those old carnival shooting games, the ones in Frontierland and Disneyland, or Buzz Lightyear's Astro Blasters. I was thinking of that ride the other day. Anything that you're sort of using some kind of a gun or a device to target something and throw something at it, whether that's a projectile or whether that's a ball or a ring or whatever. And so I went to an old school arcade this week and I played the most violent video games that I could find at that arcade. And I kind of got back into sort of a childhood mindset and a mindset of, oh, yeah, I'm going to use these joysticks or I'm going to use this video game gun and let's see what happens. So the one thing that I found a lot was that anything you were shooting at tended to be, because I wasn't playing Street Fighter or something like that, tended to be non-human. So you can think of it as an object. There were planes, robots, dinosaurs, skeletons, other undead monsters, things like that. And so I played the Jurassic Park Jeep ride where you're shooting at dinosaurs and trying to get away from them. And and then Terminators from the Terminator series, and just kind of like trying to mow them down so that they didn't approach the humans. The one that I found really fascinating was a game where you are a little fighter plane in World War II, and you start with the Battle of Britain, and you're trying to save London from destruction from the Luftwaffe, the German fighter planes. And so you are targeting planes. You know there's somebody in the plane, but really what you're trying to do is just shoot the planes out of the sky. And so there's something about this. There's something about having the power to drop something out of the sky or drop something onto the ground. Something about targeting, something about eliminating a threat that is gaining on you, a threat that is going after someone who is not, someone who is innocent. The people of London are innocent. The humans are innocent. The pirates who are not undead pirates are innocent, and you need to work to save them from the oncoming hordes. So there was a power, there was a satisfaction, I suppose, and a real rush of adrenaline as you just drop threat after threat after threat after threat. So that was me playing once again with targeting.
Really interesting. And also interesting how with axe throwing and darts, those are often in bars too. Like at least in the ones like that I've seen of, there is alcohol served on the premises, if not primarily alcohol on the premises. And
Yes.
it's ironic, you know? It's a little bit ironic, but I'm sure nothing too terrible has happened as a result. It's kind of like towing the line, between completely safe versus a little bit unsafe, but mostly safe.
Yeah, definitely.
I have a friend who also collected Nerf guns a lot as a kid. Like, they had so much to the point of just having a whole wall full of them. And that was always a very playful experience of shooting at each other and then having to scrounge around and collect all the bullets again afterwards. And same thing with like laser tag or paintball. Although I have not done paintball, but I have played laser tag as a kid a little bit. The adrenaline was really cool, and you're kind of like hiding and seeking each other out and navigating conflict and survival, because there's kind of that push and pull of, okay, I'm safe, I'm alone, but I have to keep moving, and I'm gonna round a corner and I'm gonna see an enemy, and who's gonna have the better aim, the better skill of all of that. And I also never super got into those kind of arcade fighting games, or those button mashing ones is kind of what I refer to them as, because goodness knows that is such a high skill level to button mash your way to success in those kinds of fighting video games. I did want to talk about a lot of myths and stories around heroic archers, which I started with like one or two, and then I found several more to talk about. So with the bow and arrow, that's been kind of a very symbolic thing in a lot of our legends or myths and stories, where it kind of symbolizes control or self-reliance and patience, because you have to kind of wait for the right moment to strike, but you also have to be very accurate. And then there's the idea of the apple, which usually symbolizes knowledge and immortality and temptation. But in some of the stories that we're going to look at, these apples can also symbolize food itself and power and wealth, but also sacrifice and risk and the precision that you need as a warrior. Because if you think about it, I mean, an arrow shooting an apple, like there's kind of something behind that. So the first story myth is of William Tell, some European guy. He didn't want to bow down to the new king or something, and he was told to shoot an arrow at an apple on his son's head. and he prepares 2 arrows, but he splits the apple with the first arrow on the first try. And then the other person asks, "Wait, why did you have a second arrow?" And then William Tell is like, "Well, that second arrow was reserved for you if I had injured my son." And he continues to continuing to be able to be himself and, do what he wants and stand by his own beliefs. And then there's a story of Robin Hood, a legendary heroic outlaw from English folklore. Stole from the rich, gave to the poor, a bandit, an outlaw, symbolic of bringing justice to your own hands with your own tools and your own group of people. And his name itself, kind of now describes the idea of the heroic outlaw or the rebel against tyranny. And I think he also was proficient in fighting with swords, but I think the bow and arrow of him is kind of probably his most iconic. And then also like the silly hat with the feather in it as well. But yeah. And then from Chinese mythology, there's Hou-Yi, who was this guy well, okay, first of all, there were originally 10 suns. Did you know that, Drew? There were 10 suns in the sky.
I had no idea.
Back in the way
That's a
back.
lot of suns.
I know! It's too many. And, well, the thing was that in this myth, like, the 10 suns, like, we're not talking about, like, offspring. We're talking about orbs, like, burning orbs in the sky. 10 suns, and they all took turns, usually, to light the day up every day. But one day, they all wanted to play at once. And they scorched the earth to heck, and then Hou-Yi, this warrior guy, was called by the emperor to, help out. You can get rid of him, do what you gotta do. He tried to reason with them, he tried to intimidate them, and then finally he shot all of the suns down except for one, leaving the one that we still have today. And this guy is another example of just, using the bow and arrow as a symbol of justice and precision and skill. And like I'm pretty sure in the myths, like I'm pretty sure he also just only had like 10 arrows or something. Like there's very much of like the limitation of how many arrows you have with you, and you having to hit your mark accurately and powerfully enough to kill them, like to kill entire suns. Wild. And then other archers that we know can also be like Hawkeye from the Avengers, and like the TV show Arrow, which is that one is just very much like vigilante, modern, dark, gritty, but vigilante archers. Very specific choice of weaponry. Then I haven't seen Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, but I've also heard that there are archers in that one as
Oh,
well.
yeah. Legolas is the classic elven archer
Mm.
from Lord of the Rings, and he's just firing those things off, and he's in a competition at one point with Gimli the dwarf, and they're trying to figure out who can kill the most orcs, and it's wild.
Wow. And then there's also Merida from Brave, that Pixar movie. Her whole storyline is choosing archery to define who she is. Well, she wants to define herself for herself, and her archery is her way of doing that. And then there is the Hunger Games with our protagonist, Katniss Everdeen. She's a girl from an impoverished district, and she has to illegally hunt and gather in order to survive hunger and provide for her family. And her father's bow and arrow, which her father passed away from a coal mine incident, leaving her family kind of helpless and alone. So the father's bow and arrow was her saving grace, and then she volunteers for the Hunger Games because she's selfless and doesn't want her younger sister to have to go fight for herself. And during the first book, there's a key moment where Katniss Everdeen, this very skilled archer, because she came from very humble roots, she has to shoot this bag of apples to activate some explosives in the ground and kill some competitors and also starve the bullies in the game. The bullies had been hoarding food and basically just turning the whole tables on the whole situation. Like, talk about stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. And the bullies, they're called the careers, they're the ones who teamed up with each other. They're the privileged ones. They've been training for the Hunger Games their whole lives. They're the ones who wanted, to be there for the glory and the fame. So very much the antagonists in this situation where they're the ones who have more power and who have all the privilege. And whereas Katniss and Rue, the ones who kind of wanted to disrupt that, they're the underdogs. They're more innocent, they're not as vicious, they only killed when they had to survive in self-defense. And there's very much those parallels throughout Katniss's story of how she becomes the leader and the icon of a band of revolutionaries seeking to overthrow an entire corrupt government. And I didn't even realize that she was such a Robin Hood character until I just dove more into it. So that was really interesting for me to dive into. There were even other characters within the Hunger Games that also had throwing weapons. And there was like Clove, who had throwing knives, and there was Joanna, who was like throwing and swinging axes. And I remember when I was a teen and I read these books, I super wanted to be like these women because, dang, throwing weapons and scaring off your enemies sounds so fun. I even got to the point where I was looking at throwing knives on like shopping online on them or like throwing axes, and I showed them to my dad once, just like, "Hi, Dad, I'm interested in these. It's okay if you don't want to help me with them." But he was like, "Oh wow, that's dangerous." And I was like, "Yeah, they are. I don't think it's safe to have in the house either." "Okay, thank you for considering anyway." And I went upon my way. But hey, maybe someday there will be a throwing knife range because I'm sure. Actually, yeah, no, some of the axe throwing ranges already have other weapons that you can also pay some money to use as well.
Nice. I remember when I was a kid, that was the age of ninjas being totally popular. And so
Yeah.
ninjas had shuriken or stars, ninja stars. And there was this whole thing where kids were making paper versions of ninja
Yep,
stars
that's
and
me.
and throwing the paper stars at each other. And oh my gosh, I have pretty fond memories of that. But eventually, the leadership at the elementary school sort of nixed them and said, "Okay, guys, we don't want this turning into people actually doing damage." So the paper ninja stars were outlawed. Yeah, that was good times, Avery, good times. So we do get to a point where we are inflicting harm, inflicting pain on another person through aggression and through violence. And so now we're moving from play harm into real harm. And we talked about that line before, so we'll examine that line a little bit. In his book, Performance Studies, Richard Schechner talks about dogs giving a signal that they are playing rather than actually fighting. And so they kind of give a signal by biting the other dog's neck, but not hard. And that says, I want to play with you. I am not actually going at you full force. But when a dog is actually going to inflict pain, the other dog knows it because there's no initiation to play. There's just attack and a bite that's a bite, not a nip. And so pain is our kind of center here. And I'm thinking of things like MMA, mixed martial arts, or boxing, or Ren Fair style reenactments when people are actually hitting each other with swords or staves or something else that inflicts actual pain. And so pain is part of what is expected when you engage in this kind of fighting. So it's interesting because people choose to subject themselves to this fighting for the sake of fighting. This is not for any ideal, this is not for a family member or to protect the innocent or anything like that. This is competitive. It's competitive and it's trying to show that you are the better fighter. But you are subjecting yourself to the possibility of pain. You're walking into an MMA match saying, I'm probably going to get hurt. I'm going to feel this. And I'm going to land some blows on this person that are actually going to harm the person potentially significantly. And there's this kind of division between pleasure and pain. We're going to get to this a little later on as well, where we're supposed to avoid pain at all costs and seek out pleasure. Our bodies literally tell us, they have signals that they send. Yes, keep doing that. That is pleasurable. Keep eating that strawberry ice cream. That is pleasurable and it's doing something good for you. Do not take a ruler and hit yourself on the shoulder with it. I'm your body and I'm going to send you a signal of pain. That is not good. That is harming your body. And if you do it enough, your body is going to break down. So let's think about sort of what is the deal when we actually cross the line into harm, infliction of pain. What do you think?
I wanted to also address the play of harming with not real infliction of pain because I think with MMA and boxing, it's so raw and rough in that way of just really going at it at each other. And there are some other kind of arena sports, like going back to the old gladiators fighting in a coliseum ritual, that with other some other of these arena sports is not as much of like a beating the heck out of each other sometimes. And there could be more to it. So I wanted to start with sumo wrestling, which is very ritual heavy. It's very much it's not as much about like the pain and just like, oh, you have to submit and you have to like tap out at some point. Like how much can you take? And there's not much of the personality or pageantry that is in other professional wrestling types. And so it's very much about the tradition and the honor of being a sumo wrestler, as it's also the national sport of Japan. So it's very highly revered, and tons of people are, really into it. But it's also a very respectful situation because, before each match, the referee and the competitors all bow to each other and then they go off on them. And it's a very it's kind of you're just trying to wrestle the other opponent out of a circular ring or into touching the ground with your body parts that are not your feet. And so usually there's like some throwing and shoving or pushing down, but the matches don't last like super long because it's only a matter of time before somebody's out of the ring or somebody touches the ground. And being a sumo wrestler itself is a lifetime of dedication and training and rituals and competition. And a lot of them even live in these communal sumo training stables where their meals and their dress and all of their daily aspects are dictated by a strict tradition. And that makes me think about how you mentioned with the things that we do that are pleasurable and painful, but balancing that out, but also choosing that as your entire life. Because, like, sumo wrestling is not let me try it. It is a commitment from a very young age to a
Yeah,
very.
no dipping your toe in the water.
Exactly. And and I just when you just slow down to try to imagine one day of training to be a sumo wrestler, like you're not even at the top for a lot of your time, or like there's only so few sumo wrestlers that are really at the top of the whole world of it. And so thinking about how many there are of and trying to imagine like here's my day 423 of training to be a sumo wrestler and living this rigid strict lifestyle for what? Is it just for the fame, or is it for the whole practice of it? Is it the whole just supporting my country? Is it you know what? I don't really need to have a life that's just full of pleasure and doing what I want. Like, I like this disciplined lifestyle, which I would commend because I definitely would not want, that kind of lifestyle. So that's it's a very interesting look at a specific type of wrestling that exists in the world. Especially how with American culture, I mean, we always make fun of historically in the media, they've made fun of sumo wrestlers because frankly, Americans just don't understand it, or it's just not American culture, and so they just see it as something that's like, "Oh, look at them. Look at these funny little not little, but look at these funny big people. Like, haha. I'm glad we're not like them." But okay, America. All right. So your professional wrestling is basically just buff theater kids wanting to tell stories in buildings full of people. How much better are you? Just because, I mean, if anything, I mean, your matches are predetermined. Your winners are already decided before the match starts, and so if anything, you're all just following these soap opera style plot lines and watching these colorful people with their majestic, intricate entrances. Like, how that is so opposite to sumo wrestling with, like, all the lights and the fog and the music and the worshipers of y'all. It's just, like, I never really got into professional wrestling, as a hobby, but I've been learning about it, to talk about it here, and I also had to research it for a scenic design project in undergrad with this play called The Elaborate Entrance of Chad Deity. Highly recommend. It's also got a lot about, like, race and gender and the whole kind of look into the wrestling world and what it's really about and the emotions that kind of go on in there. But with, professional wrestling like WWF and WWE, it's really a lot of play fighting and stunt acting because the competitors know how to do it safely. And yeah, they can still get injured. So that is also a really big part of that world as well of let's put on these really, really big moves that make the crowd go wild, and also let's not go wild enough to live another day and fight another day. And even yeah, it's not as raw as boxing, or or even as unscripted as, MMA and other kinds of competitive fighting. But I think it's just another flavor of competitive fighting. So don't knock sumo wrestling because y'all are not that much better. And then there's also Lucha Libre from Mexican Oranges, where they've got a lot of colorful masks while they're wrestling, a lot of high flying maneuvers and tag teaming, and their masks are like to evoke images of animals and gods and heroes or other archetypes, and so that does affect their character play as well. And there's still kind of that soap opera feel of the storylines and everything, but there's a lot of sacredness around the mask, and removing the mask can be a symbol of loss of your identity or transforming into a different character or gimmick or mask. And it's sacred enough that removing somebody else's mask during a match is a big no-no. And I I think the colorful flavors of wrestling that I've mentioned versus the more solemn aspects of sumo wrestling, I think it's just like a very interesting multicultural salad of different options for what you want your wrestling to be like. Cause I mean, there's just like high school, like you practice wrestling in high school oftentimes, and my friend also does jujitsu, which is where wrestling is more of like a, yeah, we're just kind of gonna just go at it and try to outstrength each other. But jujitsu can be a more, I'm gonna wait and see what you're gonna do, and I'm gonna stalk you a little bit just to figure things out, and I'm gonna do the opposite of what you're gonna try to do and just kind of outsmart each other. So there's also that kind of those genres of fighting and wrestling where it's more let's outsmart you and do that. So there's also kind of the brains and the strategy and the skill level of it going in. So a lot of really big worlds of fighting and pain inflicting going on here.
Oh, yeah.
So we've talked about causing and inflicting pain, but what about destruction and the cycle of building and destroying?
Yeah, let's talk about that. The first thing I thought of when I was looking at this particular kind of prompt was Shiva, the Hindu god of creation and preservation and destruction. So I got interested in Hindu gods, of which there are many. They're sort of the main three, and then there are many, many more. When I started teaching theater and world cultures, and we have a play when we look at India called The Recognition of Shakuntala. And this is a play that sort of reveals Hindu virtues that you look for in the person that you're going to spend your life with and the person who is going to be part of your family, those kinds of things. And so I looked at the idea of what the Hindu gods and goddesses were trying to create in the world and what they represented. So let's talk about Shiva. Shiva creates, preserves, and destroys. And the idea is that there is something eternal. There's an eternal soul or an eternal form beyond the many forms that the world goes through or the many forms that human beings go through. And Shiva destroys and creates and destroys and creates by dancing. Dances to break down, dances to build up. And when he dances, he's often depicted as holding the sacred fire. And the sacred fire is Agni, as in Agni Kai, the firebender duel challenge that Zuko gets burned when his father, Lord Ozai, challenges him to the Agni Kai. And so that's the sacred fire. And fire itself, so that got me thinking about fire itself and the way that fire can create. It can cook food. It can make mud into clay. It can do. It can make metal. It can make metal into different shapes or glass into different shapes. It can certainly create. It can preserve. It can keep things warm so that the cold will not destroy them. And of course, fire can destroy. And I think this is one of the things that's so interesting about the firebenders in Last Airbender. I did kind of a little poll, not to get too far off the track, but I'm sorry, we're talking about Avatar: The Last Airbender, so just a little off track. I did a little poll to see what kind of bending people would want if they could have access to any of the four styles of bending, and fire bending tends to be the one that people choose the least. I think
Mm.
water bending is most frequently chosen, and then earth bending, and then air bending. But fire bending doesn't tend to be as popular. And when I check in with people and say, oh, well, what about the other types? Whenever they mention fire bending, they always say, well, it's just too easy for it to get out of control.
Wow.
Or it's more of an aggressive style of bending. It's not like water bending where you can heal or earth bending where you can reshape. And so I thought about sort of fire and the destruction, and I just got really, really down the rabbit hole into that. So that was pretty fascinating. But what do we learn by rehearsing building and destroying? What do we learn about ourselves? What do we learn about the world? Maybe there's something here to Shiva, right? In order to create, you must destroy. I think there's a famous Pablo Picasso quote about that. Something, I'm paraphrasing, but something along the lines of every act of creation begins with an act of destruction. You have to
Mhm.
clear away what happened before in order to build something new. So let's talk about Lego, shall we? Lego structures. So you take time and care building them brick by brick, piece by piece. And I guess there's a question that we have as kids and adults. How long do you leave those structures built before you break them apart, before you take them apart or break them apart so that you can build something else with your Lego bricks? What does it feel like to build something with Lego versus break it apart? Where's the level of satisfaction in building versus breaking? Lego Masters. Have you seen the show Lego Masters, Avery?
Oh, I've heard of it.
Okay, it is 100% recommend.
Ooh.
And so yeah, it is wonderful in the way that they have all the contestants build all of these cool structures and challenges. And then typically you will have Will Arnett, who is the host,
Oh
will
my
have some
gosh.
cool, yes, he will have some cool way to destroy them. Whether he swings, sometimes he swings a wrecking ball,
Oh,
sometimes
wow.
he puts a whole bunch of weight on them, sometimes he straight up explodes them.
Oh,
And then they
wow.
do this whole slow-mo thing with the Lego structure, boom, and all the bricks flying off.
Wow.
So it's very much, I think the show really leans into, yes, these are toys that are for building clearly, but it's just as fun to break them apart and build something new. And other things that I think of when I think of sort of destroying and kind of the idea of what are you destroying and how are you getting pleasure from it. Popping bubble wrap. Oh my gosh, how many times have we popped bubble wrap and just gone,
Mhm.
yeah, crunch, crunch,
Mhm.
crunch, crunch, crunch.
And some bubble wraps are good for it, and then some of them are, like, not as satisfying at all.
Oh heck yeah, I know, absolutely. Stepping on sticks and feeling that satisfying break of the stick beneath your foot. Bands destroying their instruments on stage. I think classically The Who and Pete Townsend, I think, may have been the first person to smash his guitar on stage, but that kind of thing. And then I also looked into rage rooms, aka destruction rooms, but I guess rage rooms is the normal name or the most common name. So rage rooms started in Japan and they rose in popularity in the US post COVID. And you can destroy things that are in the room. They have things that you can destroy, or you can even bring personal items that you want to destroy. Maybe something that your ex gave you that you just want to destroy, or something that is not working anymore and you're really upset about it. And so you can destroy that. And they have all these different ways for you to destroy. Interestingly, statistics have found that rage rooms are kind of gendered, and the majority of participants in rage rooms are women. And they want to, I suppose, take aggression out in a way that is controlled, that you like use safety goggles and like all kinds of protective gear. But that was fascinating. And when I thought of rage rooms, I thought immediately of Hulk smash and the idea of the Hulk just like bursting through a wall or smashing the ground or something like that. And back when the Avengers was a big thing, there were these Hulk gloves that you could buy and you could put on, and then if you touch something with the glove, it would make a smashing sound.
Wow.
So, a lot of satisfaction, I suppose, from destroying, but really interesting the cycle of building and destroying. So, what do you think?
Yeah, it reminds me of this one internet video. It's basically performance art. There's a person making pottery or a potter. They're working on I did not have to explain that much. They're working on a little ceramics wheel, and next to them is a table, and every time they finish a little cup or a pot, they put it onto the table. So it starts with 1, starts with 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They just line it up into rows, and then by the time that they get to the end of this plank of wood that is this table, the whole thing has enough weight on one end to tip over and smash everything into one pile on the ground. And the comments on these videos are like, "What the hell? Just make the table more stable. Make sure that it doesn't tip over. You are so unintelligent. Why would you do that? This is so ridiculous. This is so silly." Just like anger, anger, anger. And in the video, the person, like, they act surprised enough, and then they take the clay that's all smushed together now, they just pick it all back up, roll it back out again, and then start over the whole process again with the first little pot. And I think that's a very clever way to poke fun at the idea of creation and destruction, especially with pottery, which is such a time consuming act where you're working really hard to shape this cup as perfectly as you want to. And then you have to put it carefully away and then like get it into the kiln and like make sure that it works out and stuff. So, like, that whole process of making of it doesn't have to be perfect, but the whole tedious and attention needing and detail oriented process of getting a pot from clay to a finished product. And I can understand how it can be frustrating for people to witness the satisfying nature of, "Wow, you got, like, 20 clay pots all in a row. That this is awesome. Yeah, I can't wait for them all to be fired, and then they're gonna look nice and pretty." But instead, they all tip over right at the point when you are supposed to be done. And I love that. I think performance artists should continue to do this. I mean, that also reminds me of Ai Weiwei with that famous photograph that he has, oh, a series of photographs of him holding a ancient Chinese vase and then dropping it, and then frame of it being in the air, and then finally it's on the ground and into pieces. And that also caused a lot of outrage as well, but definitely his art concept for that performance art piece was, what does it really mean to just destroy something just for the sake of destroying it? Yeah, this vase is thousands of years old from an ancient dynasty and has a lot of history, and somebody that we'll never know made it, and it has all of those ideas around it. But what if I just smash it?
And also calling into question what is the government of China smashing in order
Oh,
to make
yeah.
way for the new, what is being forgotten or destroyed that's old. And
Mhm.
yeah, if you separate it with I dropping one vase, yes, that's one thing that's distilled down, and you can go, oh, how can he do that? How can he destroy history? But looking around at what is going on in China as a whole, and in other countries as well, certainly not limited to China, but looking at what historically is being sacrificed in the name of progress.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. He definitely had a lot of political connotations in a lot of his work too. And when I have played some video games where I have had to create like cities and stuff, such as Cities Skylines or School Tycoon, even from like 2004. Well, I didn't play it in 2004, but I played it later on. So, in a lot of simulation games like these, where you're building a town or a theme park or whatever, there are opportunities to add chaos for fun. And these often come in the form of natural disasters, where you can either prep your citizens for survival or to succumb to the disaster. And usually I play these games in a way where it's very neat and orderly, and then as soon as a disaster happens, I fix everything up and try to forget that it ever happened. But the thing about the thing about cities is that you can't really forget that a disaster ever happened. And I think if we look at all the natural disasters that have happened in the world, I mean, still recovery is happening to this day, especially for situations that happened years or decades ago. And leaving a permanent mark on a city or a world is not just in the form of physically, but also even in the culture of the place of, once you have survived something or lost some things to disaster and destruction, everything is different from then on. And you have to just you can't really forget that it happened, and the things that you rebuild are going to be different from the things around them forevermore. And when you look at architecture, I think that's also really interesting thing to ponder about. And even in The Sims, have you can have people that you create out of any desire. You can make them look like yourself, you can make them look like your enemies, you can make them look like celebrities or characters from your favorite TV show. I mean, the characterization and the customization of creating the people in The Sims is its whole own section of hours of gameplay for a lot of people. I mean, the amount of you can change the jawbones to look how you want them, like the hairlines, the eyebrow size, the how far apart the eyes are. And I mean, for me, that's enough for me to just get attached to the Sims characters enough where I don't really want terrible things to happen to them. But also, there are a lot of players who are ready at some point during their gameplay to let them put babies in the oven or cook their babies or give a romantic, flirtation to the Grim Reaper or just have, fires everywhere and then be on fire and then have things be flooded and broken and do do things where they shouldn't be done, like cooking in the bed or pooping in the dining table. Like, there's, so much chaos to work with when you want to with these games. And the thing about playing with building and destroying is that, yeah, it can be a peaceful world to take a break from the chaotic world around you, or it can also be a world where you can play with controlled chaos where you're not the victim of it and you can kind of put that victimhood onto somebody else and it's not going to hurt anybody. There are some other games that are also centering itself around just destruction and chaos, so not really having the building element around it, such as Tear Down, which is it kind of looks like Minecraft, but like a lot prettier. And you get to go on a lot of crime missions, like stealing artwork or shutting down a corporation. And at every opportunity, I think your first weapon is like a sledgehammer. So that says enough about destruction and stuff. But it's basically like a digital rage room or rage world where you can sink a whole waterfront of houses into the ocean. You can set cars on fire. You can drive wrecking ball vehicles into buildings and just set everything on fire and just do all of the chaos and destruction. And it's so therapeutic. Like the first time that I've played it, like it's just so therapeutic because you get to just wreck these little building blocks and pieces and like it looks so cool because you don't intentionally see that in real life. You don't want to see okay, well, okay, yeah, you might turn your head when you look at a car crash, on the road and be like, "Oh my gosh, what happened?" Like, "Oh, that's so unusual." But, like, that's humans. We're primed to look at things that are unusual, and so I'm sure we don't actually want to see an entire building get wrecked by a wrecking ball in real life while we're standing under it. So the fact that games have progressed enough to where you get to have a virtual rage room, and I don't even have to put on safety glasses while I'm playing this game, like, that's pretty cool. And even in other games, you can also be other creatures, like, you don't even have to be a human. I've also played a little bit of Goat Simulator to research for this episode, and you in this game are an invincible goat, and you can destroy mostly everything around you. You get to headbutt people, and the people in this world are just like they can just ragdoll. You can just headbutt them, and they collapse and stuff, but then they just get up, and then you can headbutt them again. And I just really appreciate, video games as an outlet to be able to have kind of funny versions of this chaos, like the Tom and Jerry of the aggression world, of being able to be a creature of chaos, and the consequences in the game are not really dangerous to you. And as somebody who often can be very conflict avoidant and love keeping peace in real life, the opportunity to explore this within games is really meaningful to me and helps me at least like let some of that aggression and frustration out.
Oh, yeah, the concept of respawning, Avery.
Mhm.
And like you said, they stand back up and they're active again. So sometimes monsters respawn, and then sometimes player characters, PCs, respawn. There was a movie, okay, Avery, if you haven't seen this movie, definitely check it out. It's called Run Lola Run.
Okay.
And it's a German movie from either late 90s or early 2000s. And Lola is trying to do something in, I can't remember which city she's in, but she has something that she's supposed to do. I think she's supposed to stop a crime. And she fails, and so she respawns and keeps trying again. There's a Tom Cruise movie that is similar, that is about him respawning sort of in a Groundhog Day style. But I think it's called Day After Tomorrow, if I'm remembering
Mhm.
correctly. But definitely check out Run Lola Run and see sort of the whole what happens when she tries something different.
Hmm.
Also, you were talking about bullet holes or destruction to city.
Yeah.
And I have a couple of thoughts about that. I did my master's program at the University of Texas at Austin, which, among many other things, is famous for a campus shooting from the tower in the center of campus in, I believe it was the 1960s. And the shooter was on a balcony at the top of the tower and was shooting people kind of in the plaza below. For many, many years, they had that balcony closed off so that it wouldn't sort of attract people who wanted to do the same thing or people who had sort of a not a healthy interest in what was going on. And then at some point they reopened it and they kept the bullet holes that I think it was the SWAT team had used when they had shot the shooter
Oh, wow.
and taken him down. And so you can still see the bullet holes from when he was shot. And that was kind of fascinating. And then another example is in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia Herzegovina, where the Serbian forces during the war in Yugoslavia, what was then Yugoslavia, held the city captive and under siege for months and months. And what the city has done is they have chosen some of the bullet holes and rather than fixing them, some of the mortar shells that made an impact or bullets that made an impact, they have taken a red resin and poured it over the bullet hole. And these are called Sarajevo roses because they mark the spots where that destruction was. And so instead of fixing it and saying we're going to kind of paper over the violence that happened here, there is artwork that is created in memorial fashion. So I thought that was pretty fascinating.
Wow. Yeah.
And sometimes, speaking of getting into violence, sometimes play is rehearsal or avoidance or an outlet for violence that could occur in the real world. And there are ways that games or other experiences allow people to act out possibly fantasies or possibly prepare to act on fantasies of inflicting violence. This is a whole big question, and I'll get to that in just a second. But I think of people putting targets on dartboards or putting targets on the papers that you shoot in shooting ranges and that kind of thing. Violent video games or other games where you are trying to kill characters, harm characters. There's this game called Kill Dr. Lucky that was envisioned as almost a prequel to the game Clue. And it puts you, it's a very dark game because it puts you in the position of trying to kill a character and you're trying to kill a specific character with a specific weapon in a specific room. And so if you can fulfill all those things, you've met your objective and you win the game. Vampire the Masquerade. In this role-playing game and its associated games, you have to decide when to feed, how to feed, if you're going to feed on humans, or if you're going to break into blood banks and steal blood, or if you're going to feed on animals. This is very Anne Ricey, kind of taking her ideas of vampires and kind of putting them into a game where you really you have these tendencies, you must do something. You must feed, you must have blood somehow. How are you going to do that? And the kind of last thought that I had was the proliferation of the first person shooter game and getting away from the sort of dinosaurs and undead monsters and terminators that I was shooting at when I was in the arcade. This is you are shooting real human beings, and I know that you have some examples too. But you actually switch guns, you switch firearms, you look for something that's going to be more powerful. And so the shooting in Columbine back in the 2000s, it was one of the things that came to light is that both of the shooters were interested in first person shooter games, particularly Doom and Quake, I believe it was. And so the first person shooter games came under scrutiny, and they were blamed for these two young men reducing human beings, the human beings who were at their school, to video game images and just taking all of the humanity out of the people who went to school with them. There are still studies on whether enacting violence in this sort of fantasy way begets violent acts or it redirects and it takes the desire out. Avery, do you know the play The Nether?
Yes, I do. I've
Okay.
read it and I've seen it.
Yeah, the Nether dives into this in a very interesting way, and I won't go too far into it, but it's a play set in the future about a part of the internet, or a part of what is at that point the Nether, and people essentially spend most of their time in the Nether. There's a section of it called The Hideaway, which was created or adults to inflict dark fantasies on child characters. And there's a specific child character who is a big part of the play, indicating kind of what is going on with the character who is being pursued by the police officer. And so that's an example of this question of what does it do? What does play violence beget in the real world? So, still unanswered questions. It gets into neuroscience and psychology and stuff that's not in my realm of expertise. But what do you think about violence in games and violence in real life, Avery?
Yeah, I am fortunate enough that I do prefer my games to be a bit more lighthearted in terms of their violence. I have played like Call of Duty a bit growing up, but I found out that I wanted more of a storyline in my games. So I moved away from Call of Duty in favor of other more role-playing storyline games like Skyrim, which does have a strong amount of violence. It's just not violence centered, and I think that's what a lot of games when you're like my parents and all you see is just us stabbing or killing people, you might not differentiate that from like Call of Duty, where you are just like shooting people and kind of treating human beings as just like disposable NPCs, because that's just all they are, and they are just like the pixels. And there is kind of that worry among the rest of the world where, yeah, is your violent tendencies in game like correspondent with the violence that rises on the outside? But I think the fact that FPSs have gotten a lot of negative air around them due to just very specific violent people who have like named them, it's not really a there's not enough correlation to say that yes, these video games are causing it, but it's more so that in modern day, those games are kind of the only way for these already violent people to kind of express themselves sometimes. And so I don't know, there's just like a lot of nuance to it, and then there's more things outside of the conversation, like the amount of guns in America, for example, and the policies that we have around them that are very lax, and also the upbringing situation of the people and how their parents treated them. So, I mean, there could be violent people who really like, I don't know, like Kirby, the little pink puffball, and take pleasure in eating up other characters and swallowing them whole. Like, there's so much nuance to play in games that even the world of violence itself intersects with that nuance in other ways, and just but all we can really do is just kind of keep investigating it and take accountability for the other ways outside of play that also affect violence in this country and in other countries. And with a game like Red Dead Redemption that I've also played, specifically Red Dead 2, you are centering a criminal lifestyle where you can choose between honorable or dishonorable dialogue choices, and you are just taking your gun out and shooting people in the head, and you do have consequences for committing crimes or killing innocent people, but the storyline of the game is to kind of get you into the head of these criminal cowboys and their lives and their motivations and such. And it's yeah, it's just a very interesting conversation around like justification of violence and the games that do justify it. And then the games that also talk about it in like a historical way, like Assassin's Creed also kind of integrates historical fiction into the stories as well. And even when you're playing games with your friends too, like, you can also kill them. Like, Among Us, I mean, that's just a game where you just kill somebody just because 'cause you're told to kill them and think really nothing of it and just try to get away with it. And other games like Boomerang Foo, you just throw boomerangs at each other and try to kill your friends. Or Party Animals, where you are little cute little animals, but you try to beat each other up and knock each other off of a boat or off of the island. And there's yeah, I mean, there's so many ways that aggression and violence can come out. Because even then, like, when me and my siblings would play multiplayer games as a kid, sure, we might be, like, killing little rats in Donkey Kong, but if our sibling did something that was like, "Oh, you're playing too long. Stop playing so much. Give me the controller this time." "No, I'm gonna take it." "No, no, no." Grabs the controller, hits the other person on it, cries, tears, yelling, discipline. Like, is not you can be violent in so many ways due to so many reasons, and I don't know, I do wanna keep learning more about this because I think it's a very important topic, but I the fact that we are studying play is and how it relates to aggression is just really important, and I think more people should be more aware of it and curious about it.
Yeah, me too. It's an ongoing discussion and certainly a part of how we understand people's socialization and what play can do and what play can rehearse in ways both good and bad.
Yeah.
And the last section here, before we wrap things up, is I wanted to talk about consensual bodily stress or pain, calling this section "Hurt So Good," just like the Mellencamp song, John Cougar Mellencamp song. And think about various ways that pleasure and pain, rather than being on opposite ends of a scale, are kind of together on a certain scale. We'll start out with referencing a chapter in a book that I edited with my friend Matt Omasta. And the chapter is called All the Dungeons a Stage. And so, stories and playful experiences that are created by pro dominatrixes, and the consensual pain that is found during a curated and scheduled erotic experience. The receiving of pain and the experience of being dominated are central to the pleasure. And of course, usually when we think about these experiences, we probably think of safe words so that certain playfulness or acting can happen, like a person who is receiving pain, kind of feeling it and responding to it, but still wanting it. And so a safe word means no, 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 stop, I need to tag out, right? That this is going beyond pleasure and I'm now sort of revoking consent. There are all kinds of different things that stress the body, and even overdoing food and drink that we talked about in one of our previous episodes. That stresses the body, but oh my goodness, is there a pleasure associated with it? How many times has somebody said, "Oh, I ate too much. Oh my gosh, I feel just horrible," right? Pain, momentary pleasure, momentary pain. And sometimes the brain gets sort of caught and doesn't make that kind of separation between the two and somehow associates the two. How many people are there who bite their nails or maybe, pick at little spots on their skin or something like that? And the brain is kind of like, okay, that's momentary pain, but for whatever reason, I am filing that under pleasure. So, Avery, I'll hand it off to you.
There is even this phenomenon where you are experiencing cute aggression, where you might see like a picture of a cat or like a really, really cute bunny, and you just want to like, oh, I just want to squeeze you. Oh, you're so cute. Oh my god. Ah! Like I do that often if you can't tell, but I like to scream when I just see really cute things, and I just am just full of just screaming in the head and just wanting to just run over and just, like, shake it up a bit and just
Yeah.
I'm not dangerous, I swear, but it's just a thing of just like, "Oh, I wanna squeeze you, I just wanna eat you," even though you don't really wanna eat them, but sometimes people do. I don't know, but yeah, there's a lot of, like you can experience a positive of like, "Oh," and also a negative of, "Ah," at the same time. And then it reminds me a lot of, like, getting massages, like, my body is desperately in need of a massage, but I know that if I were to ever get a professional one at this point, it would be so painful, and I'm pretty sure that I cannot handle that at this second because I know that they're just gonna be like, "Oh, yeah, we'll go easy on you," but they're gonna find all the good spots, and I'm just gonna be an absolute mess afterwards, and I don't know if I can handle that, so, and until then, I'll just waddle away with my sore little body. And as a knowledgeable person about BDSM, I find oftentimes that good BDSM people, like good as in like quality, healthy people in BDSM, they're the most communicative people and focused on safety and trust as a foundation and conversation as a way around navigating sex and then integrating more objectively painful things if they want or if both parties and all parties want it. Christian Grey from 50 Shades of Grey is a bad example of BDSM.
Oh
He's
boy.
possessive, he is every single thing that he does is exemplifying emotional or physical or sexual abuse. His relationship with Anastasia, it just lacks basic trust, any communicative healthiness, and any empathy even. And there's so much patriarchal control going on in his world where all the sex is on his terms, like they get to do what he wants, and like he's the one pushing her to explore things that she's not comfortable with, and just it is just all not healthy example. And I cannot wait for a more mainstream healthy example of BDSM to appear because that is not helpful for the community or anybody who's interested in getting into it, because if you think that's what it is, that's not great. And even within the community, a lot of people involved in BDSM tend to have very normal, average lives outside of it. And being involved in this personal exploration and even community of it is a way for people to spice up their lives and give them some sort of meaning or purpose outside of any other identifier categories of themselves. And it can be a place for connection and a shared language of intimacy and especially consent. And it's a pleasurable way to give and receive consensual aggression when you want to. And I think that's just really important to communicate to the rest of the world who might have, other preconceived notions of it as well. And then as for tattoos and piercings, I mean, I once I have a solid amount, like multiple, and after a piercing, I had to tell myself, "All right, Avery, now you have to schedule your dentist appointment because you've been putting it off, and if you can go through this painful piercing experience, I know that you can sit through a dentist appointment." All right? So
Oh,
that
there
was
you go.
Yeah. The ritual of getting tattoos and piercings is very fun, and it's always great to exchange compliments and backstories with other people who you see. So it's also a way of feeling seen by other people and also getting to experience that. But also, when you meet a friend who does not seem like they would get a tattoo, but then lo and behold, they have like a small one on their ankle. And you're like, whoa, what's the story behind that? Like, wow, you got that? Like, wow. Like, the reasons that people get tattoos too. I mean, of course, there are so many people who probably never thought they would, but then something happens in their lives and then they want to commemorate it in a way on their bodies. And I think it's a very great thing that we have that opportunity in society to commemorate important events like that because you only got one little squishy little body. So might as well do something that, sure, it might hurt in the moment, but ultimately, what is your goal with it? And what do you want the impact to be afterwards?
It's all about curation of the self.
Yeah.
Who do you want to be? How do you want to communicate who you are to other people? Do you want to hide that particular tattoo or piercing? Or do you want it to be visible? Are you okay with people asking questions about it? And in both of those instances, definitely there's momentary pain involved. And there's almost possibly a sense of, I went through that and I survived it. I went through that piercing, and now I actually have the piece of metal in my body to remember that I went through that. I went through that tattoo. And I have friends and family members who have sat through hours in the chair,
Mhm.
hours, in order to get exactly the tattoo that they wanted. And going through that process and remembering that process and saying, look, look at this piece of art which was permanently put onto my body, and I sat and I consensually accepted every single needle prick that it took to get that ink under my skin. So, yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and it also reminds me of survivors of violence or abuse who do eventually choose to get tattoos in commemoration of their survival. Or even survivors of suicide attempts, they might have the semicolon somewhere on
Yeah.
them. And that, those kinds of examples are where it might be reclaiming a traumatic event that you've been through, that you've survived, and now that you've been through that non-consensual pain, now you get to have a little bit of consensual pain to kind of reclaim a little bit of your own power.
Yeah, absolutely. To take control where control did not exist before.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, to wrap up, to conclude, I found this quote in the play JB by Archibald MacLeish. And JB is a play that's a retelling of the biblical story of Job. And in this section, the two characters, so to refresh folks' memories or to let them know if you're not familiar with the story of Job. Also recreated, by the way, in Good Omens Season 2. So that's fun that there was a retelling of this story, but this is a modernization. And what's going on here is that God and Satan have a bet. And the bet has to do with a man named Job. In this version, he's a businessman named JB. And so Satan is betting that if God takes enough away from JB's life, if he kills his family, wrecks his finances, inflicts JB with illness, that JB will turn away from God. And God says, he's not going to turn away. He loves me too much. I'm not going to inflict anything on him, but you may, Satan. You may test him. And so everything is about testing this man to see how much he can endure. And in this section, the actor who's going to play God said, "Here's your mask. Here's the Satan mask." And because when the actors are playing God and Satan, they put the mask on and they speak in biblical language. And so the actor playing God says, "Now you're not going to find this mask beautiful." And here is what the guy says who is playing Satan as he takes the mask. He says, "Beauty's the creator's bait, not the uncreator's. His is nothing, the no face of nothing, grinning with its not there eyes, nothing at all, nothing ever, never to have been born at all." And so the idea of the uncreator, I guess possibly the most frightening aspect of destruction and violence and aggression and all those things that we've been talking about is that you can get to an existential state of nothingness. That if you break something down, there's a possibility that you might have no new building or no remembrance. It's like whatever was there never was, like the nothing in the never-ending story. The never-ending story, it's absolutely brilliant how the villain is depicted. Now, there's a secondary villain, the Gomorrah, but the primary villain is the nothing. And all it is just sort of this storm which takes everything away, leaving nothing behind. And so it gets us, it really plays upon those fears of what if there was something there that can never, ever return. And so maybe playing aggression and playing destruction and playing rebuilding, going back to Shiva and the cycle, the Lord of the Dance and the cycle, might help us engage with this idea of decay and rebirth, destruction and rebuilding, the power to clear away and the power to replant, the power and the knowledge of knowing that we can have new life right after things die. So that's my little closing thoughts.
Wow, what a phoenix of a thought you got there.
Hey, yeah, absolutely.
Well, Drew, I really appreciate you discussing all these things about aggression, violence, and destruction with me today. And I hope that we were able to shed light on a lot of topics surrounding how it's connected to play and also to our own realities. This has been Powered by Play with Avery and Drew. If you've been enjoying this podcast, you can support us online at Ko-fi. That is ko-fi.com/poweredbyplay. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.